to go to Ric Grenell a couple of issues because, Rick, starting with some political stuff, I know you have to be careful about these statements, but we're learning more and more about how this Biden administration is trying to spin. Well, this happened under the Trump administration. And now we're hearing that the Pentagon reported it as UFOs, didn't even know what these were, supposedly. I mean, they're starting to backtrack on the story about why they didn't brief people like you or Mike Pompeo or the defense secretary about what they were finding in the sky.
Look, I don't even know what the real truth is. I do know that we've got bureaucrats who are playing some partisan games like they always have without having a political team that keeps them in check, that is constantly pushing on them. We just really don't know if we're getting the truth. This is a crisis for the intelligence community because the public thinks that they're being very partisan with the leaks and with the information they share. Now we're seeing that they kept information from the Trump team. So look, I think this is a crisis for them. They need to realize that transparency is not political. It's their friend. They should become very transparent. I tried to do that when I was acting DNI. I think the public right now is really sick and tired of partisan games. And if the intelligence community leadership, including Avril Haines, doesn't start coming forward with transparent information, then I think that they're going to start seeing some real problems when it comes to funding, future funding. Congress is hearing the message from the American public.
Yeah, it was Senator Rubio who brought up, it was a couple of years ago, Logan, you were saying this, when he made the statement about when there was a lot of talk about UFOs coming out of the information.
We actually have the statement.
We have the statement, yeah.
He said the direct quote was, frankly, if it's something outside this planet, that may actually be better than the fact that we've seen some of this technological leaps, maybe from China or from Russia. So he was already putting out there that some of this UFO talk, you better hope it was aliens. Because if not, you're talking about international.
And it goes directly to what you were saying, Rick, is that if you're not educating the elected politicians who, whether that's the executive branch or the legislative branch who decide your funding, the executive branch who's supposed to run your offices, if you're keeping information from them and trying to give them not the full story and acting like you're the ones in charge, and maybe that's the message you're putting out to other leaders as well, that is a serious Washington crisis. We've talked about the bureaucracy being out of control. This kind of underscores it. I mean, this takes it to a whole new level if you're not briefing the president, the Secretary of Defense, and intelligence officials.
And look, this is the power of Congress. This is the Oversight Committee's power. They need to be able to say, look, if you can't be transparent, if you're going to completely demonstrate time and time again that you're partisan, then we're just not going to approve these big budget increases. We're not going to have faith enough to spend the American taxpayer dollars on programs that are not partisan games. And so the onus is really on Avril Haines. She needs to come clean. You know, she's already been under fire from both parties because she didn't want to do certain things that the bipartisan committees were asking her to do. I think that the media plays a big role here. We talk about this all the time. But without the media pressure in D.C. on Avril Haines to be more transparent, she's going to, calculate that it doesn't matter and she can ignore these problems. I'll say one other thing for Logan's benefit. Remember that there are lots of flying objects that are unidentified, and they don't necessarily mean something nefarious.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. And I think that if they could utilize that to be, go over everything, and then you kind of just push it aside, it's like, well, there's nothing to really see here. And this idea, well, this is just common, and now we're starting to see maps of all the Chinese spy balloons all over the world. Yeah. And it's just kind of like, again, we all know that countries are spying on each other and trying to spy on each other. There's much higher flight spying going on. Sure. There's satellite spying. But I think what, Rick, is just so upsetting to people is they were watching this in real time, literally from their backyard.
I think we all assume there is spying happening, but ongoing from both sides. But the fact that this was, we know what it is, and there it is.
And it had, we find out, Rick, that and they tell us it's got explosives on it.
Potentially.
So explosives are flying over people's houses in Missouri, and they're watching it. It's a Chinese explosive device. There it goes. Yeah. I mean, it's really is infuriating to people, as you can imagine.
When you think about Washington, D.C., completely living in its own world, we call it the swamp. It has some funny name, but the reason why it's the swamp is because when you go there, it's devoid of fresh water, devoid of new ideas. It's all that same stale talk and the same stale property. And that's what happens in the bureaucracy of Washington. we don't start moving these bureaucracies outside of Washington, we're going to get the same old, swamp mentality.
Rick, it seems like on the State of the Union and the politics of this is this administration's ideas don't really push on people tuning in, maybe and playing it down. And maybe that's because they kind of know people don't want to watch Joe Biden talk for an hour and a half. It's just kind of dull, but really not trying to make a spectacle, not trying to make it an issue. And I think that's the troubling part of that is not so much again even the American audience, but we know the world leaders and governments pay attention to these addresses to see to hear kind of from the leader of the free world and to see if he's got unity from the Congress, which he does not right now, and kind of buy-in from the American people on priorities and issues. And I have a feeling his priorities and issues tonight are not going to match most of our audiences.
Look, the old politicians of Washington, D.C. have now fallen into this trap where they use the State of the Union to really just tout what they think are their accomplishments. And I like the old days of the State of the Union, or the Trump days of the State of the Union, where he actually talked about the future and he talked about programs that need to be done in order to make our union stronger. And that's what I miss. I miss those days where we get visionary speeches about this is what I think needs to happen in order to accomplish this goal and confront this problem. I wish we could fall back into those days. But I think what we're going to see tonight is just a whole laundry list of Democrats saying this program is great and this is what we did for the far left. And look at all these woke programs that we're doing. I think it's going to make the American people angry.
We have a little UN news too. The UN Secretary Joe Ricks just kind of finished on this. He's come out with a speech, and he's now instructing UN agencies to start looking at mis and disinformation. And when you listen to this speech in the words, and we played it earlier for folks, it took a long time for him to get there, but he finishes on, it'll be issues like climate change. So the UN setting up this idea, like the Biden administration said, basically, if you're not in line with us on every policy issue, you are the bad guy. And this is you would think an institution is dealing with war in Europe right now, a massive earthquake in Turkey and Syria, which the Israelis are providing so much support for, and Turks this time are taking that support, but they'd still vote to condemn Israel at the UN. Rick, this idea again that we're going to see an internationalized version of a misinformation board.
Look, before I go after the UN, let's just hope that Americans are always generous and we always give in crises. And this Turkey-Syria earthquake is really horrific. I would encourage people to find local charities to give to. We're always generous. We should definitely do that. It's massive and it's unbelievable. Look, I spent 8 years at the UN. You know that. The last person in the world that should be the referee for mis and disinformation is the UN Secretary General. This is a body of, countries that come together, and it's the lowest common denominator of what we all agree. So I can't imagine a worse idea than having them be the referee.
I think what Rick said, it's the lowest common denominator, what you can get people to agree on. Rick's going to be joining us tomorrow for the follow-up of the State of the Union.
We'll see how it goes.
Thank you for that, Rick.